Our first speaker after the break is Muhammad Syed. He is the founder of Ex-Muslims in North America. I think it goes without saying, he's an ex-Muslim. He's going to be talking to us about rationalism in the Muslim world. I think a lot of times at conferences, and especially in the secular community, we focus on the Christians that we run into on a daily basis. Some of you may not run into any Muslims or ex-Muslims, so I've heard Muhammad speak several times, and he's excellent. Please welcome him to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Having a great morning. I'm Muhammad Syed, President of Ex-Muslims of North America. We're an organization dedicated to changing the status of ex-Muslims, both within the US and internationally. We are working to achieve this by building communities across North America in an effort to end the social isolation ex-Muslims face. We're also hoping this will serve to unite us, and we'll be able to demand change from those that deny that we even exist. I'd like to start off by talking about myself. I grew up in Pakistan, which, like most Muslim majority countries, has an insular culture. Dissent is generally not accepted or encouraged. This is not only the case in theological matters, but it's dominant in social and human development contexts as well. As a Muslim, this troubled me even back then. Both of my parents are PhDs in hard sciences, and I grew up in a scientifically rich environment. I understood the primacy and importance of science. At the same time, I was told that Islam is perfect. Everything within it is the truth. In order to overcome this cognitive dissonance, I assumed that, perhaps naively, that Islam was in line with scientific thinking, and most Muslims in the world are on the same page. I believe, due to the scientific background of my family, I believe that doubt was essential to faith, and only by examining our traditions could we arrive at the truth. Doubt, critical thinking, critique would inevitably lead one towards Islam, because everything in Islam is true. So suffice it to say that when I actually sat down and examined my beliefs, they didn't quite stand up to that test. I was not only ignorant, optimistically ignorant of my own religion, I was at total odds with the mainstream view of Islam in Pakistan. Critical thinking isn't generally tolerated or encouraged. It's important I think, to explain how Islam differs from Christianity in regards to learning and knowledge about the world. Unlike Christians and Jews, Muslims know where worldly knowledge leads. They have the advantage of seeing what happened in the West with Christians and Jews. When the natural sciences were young, many believed that the knowledge of the natural world would lead them closer to God. Muslims know that is not the case. Therefore, they are far more reluctant in pursuing that path. I was still a believer when I moved to the United States, which was a few months before 9/11. Like most Muslims, or people that appear to be Muslims, the following months and years were involved incidents of racism, fears of government overreach, despair surrounding America's war in Iraq, the loss of hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. But with many Muslims in the world, these fears led them to hold religion tighter. They asserted their identity, hijab became more common. They felt the need to show solidarity with their brothers in faith. To a great extent, it was a haze of confusion. And this will sound shocking to a lot of people in the audience, but one of the bright spots of that period for me was attending an Islamic conference held by the Islamic Society of North America. And I sat in on a speech by the ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim. And this is right around the time of Abu Ghraib, which was a prison in Iraq, where pictures came out of Americans torturing prisoners, and it was shocking to everybody. He spoke condemning the American atrocities at Abu Ghraib, and he got a rousing round of applause. He talked about how wonderful it was that the audience and the Muslim community at large were united in their condemnation of the abuse of human rights. But he did not stop there. Unexpectedly, he urged the audience to look into their own backyards. He stated that the deplorable reality that each and every Muslim country has is that prisons like Abu Ghraib exist, or even worse than them. He asked the audience, how have they condemned those prisons? How often have they spoken up against the abuses in their own home countries? How could they honestly condemn the abuses of the Western world while standing aside and letting worse atrocities continue back home? He continued by pointing out how hypocrisy is one of the worst sins in the eyes of God. And surely they weren't all hypocrites. And their condemnation wasn't limited to just the United States. This sort of frank conversation, to me, was very invigorating. And it was peculiar in its singularity. This sort of self-reflection remains rare in the Muslim community. The lack of these difficult and honest conversations are a problem for those wishing to voice a different path, people that want reform, be they Muslims or ex-Muslims, apostates. They're surrounded by a religious right that has complete dominance over societies. Not only in the present day, but throughout history, this religious right has been able to exercise control to the fact that they are able to rewrite and erase history. Unlike in the West, where today at least self-reflection and self-criticism is encouraged, the Islamic religious right has been successful in eliminating that. They have erased the flaws that have existed throughout their own history, their own rule, and within religion themselves. So why should we care about this? Why should we care about rationalism in the Muslim world? First off, we should be clear that the issue is not Muslims. The issue is the society they're surrounded in. When ex-Muslims like myself speak out about the human rights abuses in the Muslim world, often people are shocked. They take that as evidence of some inherent backwardness within Muslim people. But the society that Muslims inhabit is very different from the society we do. As dissent is near impossible, and if you do dissent, your life is often threatened. Even Muslims that advocate for change, for a milder form of faith, a less religious society, are in danger. I'll go over a few reasons why I think this might be the case. One of the things is that ideas aren't easy to disseminate. If, for example, a Pakistani Richard Dawkins existed today, would they be able to be published? Would they be able to speak out? Would they even survive? In Pakistan, there's an atheist organization. It's underground. The leader uses a pseudonym. He has not made any media appearances, yet he's hunted down. There have been multiple attempts on his life. He hasn't published anything. Andy Thompson has a book, Why God, in which he challenges the God theory. He had it translated and wanted it published in Pakistan. He was able to find a willing publisher who published a limited run, but when he tried to distribute it, the people he was working with were arrested. So the situation is closer to early Europe, pre-Enlightenment Europe, where the religion has state power, where most Muslims believe in literalist inherent versions of Islam. So in that situation, how would change happen? I believe that change needs to happen in the West. We have millions upon millions of Muslims in the West that can have these open conversations, that we can talk to, who we can convince, and who in turn can convince others. We, to a certain extent, already see that within our own ex-Muslim communities. We have people, you probably have seen this, where there's a sort of domino effect. One person in the family leaves, and as a result, other people become less religious or leave along with them. We've had cases where somebody left, and after many years of arguments, their parents left as well. And then their parents started talking with their relatives in Pakistan and various other countries. So change over here does, on the grassroots level, flow outward. And the more Muslims in the West get secularized, the more it'll help bringing secularism and rational thinking to the East as well. So some of you may remember this incident from a few years ago, where the Iranian president was visiting the United States and gave a statement that gay people do not exist in Iran at all. There was consternation, there was outrage, there was laughter. But you need to focus on why he was able to say that. Was this the first time he ever stated something like this? You would presume that something like that has been said by him in his own context in Iran multiple times in the past, but it was never challenged. Statements like these are usually not challenged. After he made the statement, an Iranian reporter, Siyama Ghadari, did a short video where he interviewed various gay people within Iran. he was jailed as a result. He was recently released after 5 years. You may presume that Iran, being one of the most conservative countries, it may be somewhat of an isolated incident. This is Turkey. Turkey is regarded as one of the most progressive, advanced, secular Muslim countries. And statements like this are from the president of Turkey. So if the president, which one would presume would be relatively well educated, of the most modern Muslim country is saying things like this, where do we stand? This is from yesterday. Apparently, Al-Qaeda was a myth. This is the last president of Afghanistan. So reality in the Muslim world versus reality for the rest of us can often be very, very different. You may wonder how this is possible. How can people get away with this? To a great extent, it's about complete control. In most Muslim majority countries, clergy is very powerful. They have a strong say in political affairs. If a country is controlled by religious authorities, reality is generally not created by what is observed and what the facts are, but the truth services religion instead. Religious identity, ego, aspirations define what truth is. We look at facts as something to help us understand the world and make it better. If religion is the animating force, then facts are what makes religion better. In most Muslim countries, the vast majority are convinced that the facts are already known, the truth is already known. There's a common statement that everything that can be discovered is already within the Quran. Therefore, secular objective reality is largely absent. Anything that contradicts religion does not have a good time. To give you an example, in Islamic mythology, within the Quran itself, genies are mentioned, black magic is mentioned. From the Islamic mythos perspective, genies are made from fire and human beings are made from clay. So as a result, there was a state-sponsored conference in Pakistan about alternative energy in which scientists from multiple Muslim countries came and they read papers, research papers, on how to harness the energy of genies. So what subverts rationalism? Anything that contradicts Islam is unwelcome. Rationalism is only allowed in limited amounts where it has no bearing on religion whatsoever. If you look at Christianity in the Middle Ages, it had a similar environment. One crucial difference, in my opinion, is that Islam is far more pervasive and all-consuming. There's a common line that Islam is a complete way of life. And it's very, very specific in the amount of prescriptions it has on how you live your life. In everyday life, even small things need to be done. How you enter a bathroom is actually regulated. Interest is forbidden. If in the American system, if interest was eliminated entirely, interest is not allowed, how would that affect credit? How would that affect our banking systems, our homes, pretty much the entire society? And religion in most of the Muslim world affects things to that extent. The Quran itself mentions the laws of inheritance. As you would expect, daughters get significantly less, wives get significantly less. And this isn't theoretical, what the scripture says. Laws are based on that. One of our members, her father is in Bangladesh, and he wants to give his estate to his daughter. He can't. Legally, he's only allowed to give a third of the estate to his daughter. So it will go to other family members, cousins, but his daughter cannot inherit, even though he wants it. One amusing anecdote regarding that specific part, the math doesn't add up. You would expect that to raise some doubt, but since most Muslims don't talk about it, they don't realize that the Quran itself is mathematically incorrect. The same exhibits in a variety of forms. I mentioned genies before. Bloodletting is something we view as Middle Ages, Dark Ages. It's still practiced today. There's something called hijama, which the Prophet Muhammad said was the best of remedies. And it's still practiced today. It involves cutting the skin and vacuuming blood out. And it's practiced within the US, around the world. This is the nicest picture I could find. If you look it up online, you'll find a lot more gory pictures. And this is a star athlete who earns somewhere between hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in Pakistan. And he's getting it done. Bertrand Russell talked about Thomas Aquinas on how his philosophy started off with the idea that Christianity was right, and therefore he was trying to prove it. And the same exists within the Muslim world. Many professionals look at the world through these Islam-tinted glasses. They start from religious truth first, or they live like I did when I was a Muslim. They live in a state of mixed dissonance, where they're not fully aware of their religion or not fully aware of science. And it's not just science. So feminists, if you're trying to reform things, you need to look towards Islam to justify feminism. A justification independent of Islam, independent of scripture, rarely holds any weight. You can understand that how limiting that is regarding reform. If you needed to adhere to Christian tenets in order to provide any form of reform regarding every aspect of society, how limited reform would be and how slow and hard it would be. Something we take for granted is separation of church and state, that theocracies are flawed, and secularism is needed for eliminating or minimizing religious conflict. None of these are even on the periphery of Muslim ideas. Because Muhammad had a theocracy, which was perfect, of course, theocracies are the best way to go forward. If you challenge Muslims on this, if you talk about Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan or Iran, the standard response you will get is, they're doing it wrong. There's no problem with theocracies. Similar to the West, you have televangelists. You have people that are preaching about the wonders of Islam, about how Islam is compatible with science. This is a very popular televangelist, and he's popular in the US as well. He operates out of the Bay. And he has his own line of cell phones. He has his own TV channel, which has 24-hour programming about Islam. And the name of the channel is Peace TV. There are various other people that are doing similar work around the Muslim world. There are creationists that to a great extent are plagiarizing what's going on in the West from the Discovery Institute and selling it to Muslims as proving Islam. So these narratives need to be challenged, and those challenges won't come from within the Muslim world. We, as secularists in the West, and even rationalists and progressive Muslims in the West need to work on challenging these narratives. But the problem is the same phenomena exists among Muslims in the West as well. This is from an article by a professor at Berkeley, Asad Ahmed, a professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic studies, I believe. So he made the statement that if you believe that, if you're making the statement that Islam is incompatible with science, you're probably an Islamophobe. Ignoring the fact that from Socrates to Galileo, throughout history, every religion has always been against science. It's not anything unique to Islam. One thing that I found particularly amusing about this is that Dr. Asad Ahmed said that the printing press caused the decline of Muslim scientific endeavors. He didn't mention the fact that the printing press was introduced to the Muslim world 300 years after the West. So imagine a world, if today Brazil or any other major part of the world gave up on the internet for 300 years. You would presume that there would be some consequence of that on their advancement. That is not mentioned. Printing press changed the modes of discourse within Islam and therefore caused the decline of Islamic scientific thought. And again, this is somebody that is teaching at Berkeley. I wish this was an isolated incident. I'm sure you're familiar with Raza Aslan. He has stated multiple times that slavery is forbidden within Islam. And most Muslims, due to the fact that you have complete control over the state, you have complete control over what is said and talked about. Many Muslims are unaware of this as well. slave trade within the Arabian world existed for 1,400 years. It enslaved, estimates are about 18 million people, and it isn't talked about. Ridiculous claims like made, Raza Aslan is also a professor in California. Ridiculous claims by him and by other Muslim professors and authors, it's great that they can make that claim. I'm a supporter of free speech. But in the marketplace of ideas, bad ideas need to be challenged. You need to counter them. You need to point out why they're bad and why they're wrong. And sadly, we're falling short on that. People are making these claims and nobody is challenging them. They're afraid of the label of Islamophobia, bigotry. So we need to do a better job of holding Islam accountable, the same way we hold Christianity accountable. Today, the world we live in, where people are able to claim, not just in the East, but in the West, about Islam, and what Islam actually is, are very, very different. You may know Karim Abdul-Jabbar. He converted to Islam due to the tradition of slavery within Christianity, the Atlantic slave trade. Malcolm X, similar story. About a fourth of Muslims in America are African American. So this is from one of his articles where he talked about why he converted and how Christian institutions were responsible for slavery. And if you knew that millions upon millions of Africans were enslaved, where most of them were transported over ground and died en route, chances are he wouldn't be as friendly towards Islam if the truth was well known and widely dispersed. Imagine if those millions of people that have converted to Islam in America had instead converted to humanism. They understand that Christianity is bad. They knew the history of Islam as well. How much better off would we be? Simply knowing the truth and putting the truth out there, honesty goes a long way. This is a picture of a Bantu slave in Somalia. Bantus were people from southern Somalia that were enslaved by people from northern Somalia and then sold in Arab slave markets. This is from a little over a century ago. The divisions that existed because of that still exist in Somali communities in America today. There are similar incidents that most Muslims aren't aware of, not just slavery, but every aspect of empire, imperialism. We often talk about colonialism and the damage done and the deaths as a result of the West, which is a perfectly legitimate conversation, but the same has been done by every single empire throughout history. Tamerlane was a Muslim conqueror who killed about 5% of the human population when he went on his conquests. In today's term, that would be roughly equivalent to killing everybody in the United States. Again, this wasn't an isolated incident. Genghis Khan, various other civilizations have done this. But within Muslim communities, we don't talk about the issues from our past. Everything was perfect. Even the language used is not honest. It's sort of a newspeak, doublespeak sort of language. Instead of conquest, we talk about how the gates of Islam were open to this country. So as activists, what can we do? One thing we need to realize is that atheism in the West affects atheism in the East. The problems within religion are largely the same. The problems of rationality are largely the same. Islam is very much like Christianity and Judaism, and a lot of the things that made you leave religion will also help Muslims leave religion. Richard Dawkins is hugely influential here. He's also hugely influential around the world. I was just having a conversation with a Somali journalist last week who worked with Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist organization. He covered them, and he left Islam as a result of Richard Dawkins. And he was in the closet covering terrorist groups within Somalia, and if it came out, him and his family probably wouldn't survive. The difficulty arises in affecting changes within Muslim communities. If you speak out, your lives are often forfeit. You probably read about multiple Bangladeshi bloggers that have been killed this year alone simply for speaking about secularism. They weren't necessarily even criticizing religion. So as Westerners, what can we do? We can empower the activists that exist in every single Muslim country. We can challenge Islam in the same way we challenge Christianity. Often people think about the fact that Islam is different than Christianity. I don't know enough to challenge Islam. Most of the narratives are the same in all three religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. the Adam and Eve story, the Noah story, the virgin birth, the fantastical miracles, the supernatural beings. From what Old Testament mentions unicorns, Muhammad had his own flying space horse. If we challenge these, if we push back against this, people will be forced to question their beliefs. And instead of having certainty, they will have doubt. We also need to be very careful about essentializing Islam or essentializing Muslims, in the sense that often people view Islam as either wonderful and we must defend Muslims, or they view Islam as horrible and evil. The truth obviously lies in between, that we're, like all ideas, Islam has wonderful parts and horrible parts. Like all people, there are great Muslims, there are bad Muslims. It's a human condition. Within Islam, for example, one of my favorite parts is there's a huge emphasis on charity. Everybody must donate 2.5% of their income to charity every single year. To me, that's wonderful. But there are obviously negative parts of that as well. We need to be even-handed when we're talking about Islam. The other thing is, due to the minority status of Islam in the West, we often are hesitant about talking about issues. We're hesitant about pushing them for reform, or we often accommodate as well. So an incident, this is I think 2 years ago in the UK, where Lawrence Krauss was speaking at a university, and he was speaking with a Muslim evangelist, and they tried to segregate the audience. Lawrence Krauss refused. There was sort of an outcry, and segregation didn't happen. But as a result of that, the Universities Association of UK issued a statement, a guidance, that we should allow segregation for Muslims. So in the East, you have people that are fighting against this, and in the West, you have people that are accommodating this instead of fighting back and supporting the reformists. Thank you very much.
Do they have a little question and answer again here?
Hi, Mohammed. We may have met a couple of years ago.
We did.
Yes, okay. At the time, I asked your friend Nas about, I got accepted to, so for those who don't know, I'm a philosopher, an academic philosopher. I publish on atheism quite often. And I got a paper accepted at a conference in Tehran, an International Philosophy of Religion conference. And the paper was specifically about how science and religion are not compatible. Like if you think you got a flying space horse, that's not compatible with scientific thinking, right? And Nas warned me against going because he thought I might, like in my mind, I was thinking, oh, I might be promoting rationalism in the Muslim world, right? And Nas warned me about going because he thought, well, actually, you might be feeding a kind of narrative that they're trying to spin about atheism being a Western phenomenon and not something that's not something that they do. And I mean, the conference itself was, there was like a, an Arabic-speaking portion, right? I was wondering if you agreed with that. If I were to get accepted again, should I go? Should I not? What reasons?
I think that's a personal question that you need to answer. But there is this issue where atheism is regarded as a Western phenomenon. It's regarded as a white people thing. And that's one of the reasons that we explicitly chose the term ex-Muslim. I'm an atheist. It's a political statement that atheists, people that leave Islam, exist everywhere from every background. So I'm not entirely sure about how that would be spent and how widely that would be covered. There is a risk of that, but the fact that these conversations aren't happening at all, from my perspective, having these conversations are better than not having them. You may convince a few people over there that may be able to convince others.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Mohammed. Great talk. Just had a quick question. You talked about the bloggers, the murders of the bloggers in Bangladesh. I recently heard an interview, I believe it was with Arif Rahman. He brought up, there's a list, like a top 20 hit list of
top 80.
Top 80, on which he found himself in the top spot. I believe he lives in the UK at the moment. A lot of people on the list also live in the West currently. I
don't know about a lot, but some of them do, and people are trying to get out.
I don't know if you've spoken to people within your group, how they feel, what the general sentiment is about, with all the murders happening, if they feel more reticent to go back to their home countries and speak, or if they feel emboldened now, or at least motivated to act,
There's obviously a chilling effect if you're speaking up and being murdered.
Correct.
So that is what they're aiming for. It's intimidation. And within our own group, yes, there are people that are more reticent about talking about that. But what we're trying to do is we're building a broad-based group, and we're hoping that over time, as more and more people feel comfortable. One of the issues is that if you're isolated, you feel you're the only one, you won't speak out. But if you have 500 people with you, 1,000 people with you, it becomes far easier. Even within the Bangladeshi bloggers, the reason they started speaking up was they started organizing 10 years ago. They became bold enough that their private conversations started becoming public. They started publishing books. So whenever you're going to push back against any power structure, be it religious or irreligious, they will push back. We have to keep fighting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting talk.
Thank you.
If I may, 2 questions. One, you used the word Islamophobia, and I'm interested to know your thoughts in terms of the concept and the use of the word. That's number one. And number 2 was if you could talk a little bit perhaps about security issues related to your organization in the United States.
Okay. So most ex-Muslims will tell you they do not like the term Islamophobia. So as I mentioned, after 9/11, I myself was targeted. There was a lot of bigotry immediately after 9/11. And it still exists today. There was a Sikh gentleman that was beaten this week. So bigotry against Muslims or those that perceive, my name is Muslim, I'll always be perceived as being Muslim, does exist, and we need to, as a society, push back against that, because that makes it easier for Islamists to point that the West is not with you, they're against you. We need to be as inclusive as humanly possible. But the word Islamophobia itself targets Islam, not Muslims. And a lot of Islamic organizations do the same thing, where they deliberately conflate that. Dr. Assad that I mentioned, where if you talk about Islam, you're actually an Islamophobe. So we need to push back against usage of that term. We need to robustly criticize Islam and be clear when we're criticizing Islam that we're not criticizing Muslims. There is no essential Muslim, no Muslim believes in every single thing, even if they say they do. In Islam, slavery is a big part and has been practiced throughout history. Most Muslims today, as most people in the 21st century, look at it with disgust. What was your second question?
About security concerns for your group in the United States.
So we have gotten death threats, and there are a lot of extremist type Muslims in the West as well. We're in a very early stage. We've been around for less than 2 years now. But what we're hoping is by marshaling a lot of people, we'll be able to change that dynamic where more and more people are comfortable coming out. We're working on a few video and podcast series where more people will start speaking out. So over time, if there's 10 years ago, the only ex-Muslim you probably heard of was Ayan Hirsi Ali. Now there are a lot more. Give it another 10, 20 years, it'll go from 1 to dozens to hundreds to thousands. And as that advances, it'll be far easier for everybody else to come out. I would posit that there are lots and lots of ex-Muslims out there. And the most common line we hear from people, we have a security process where we interview everybody before allowing them to join, and is that I thought I was the only one. When that perception in popular mythos changes, where the zeitgeist changes that, of course, there are tons and tons of people that are left Islam, then you'll see a sea change because you can't target that many people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming to speak.
Thank you.
I have a couple of related questions. Having read the Quran myself, I was wondering if when engaging in discourse about Islam and Muslims, if it's useful to have a working knowledge of the verses in the Quran, and also if it's useful to address the issue of taqiyya.
I wouldn't address the issue of taqiyya. To me, at least from what I've read, that's largely a phenomenon in the right wing in America. It's not common within Muslim communities at all. I never heard of it as a Muslim, or even after leaving Islam, until I heard it from right-wing sources. For everybody else, taqiyya is sort of the idea that you can lie in order to convert people, in order to defend Islam. The only similar concept that I had ever heard of was, if your life is in danger, you can lie. Having working knowledge is obviously better. The more you know, the better you can challenge things. There's an evangelist in the UK, Hamza Zortzis. He was interviewing P.Z. Myers. They had a conversation in which he said that the Noah incident, where the entire world was flooded, never happened. It's in the Quran. It has happened. If you know, you can push back against their apologetics much better. But the large narratives, the whole stories are largely the same.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming to speak today. I know everybody else said it, but whatever. I did want to ask, you did talk about it a little bit in your talk. last year I took a class in comparative religions, and we saw a debate on Intelligence Squared about whether or not Islam is a peaceful religion. I wanted to know what your response would be to Muslim apologetics who would say that it is.
As I was saying, essentializing Islam is across the board wrong. Islam is neither a religion of peace or a religion of war. It is a set of ideas, some of them good, some of them more violent, some of them less violent, some of them, as I mentioned, towards charity. So I would reject the question entirely. One thing that is commonly said that Islam means peace. The word, and that's a complete lie. The word Islam in Arabic means submission. For some reason that has been repeated often enough that a lot of people believe that. The word salam, which is a completely different word and is used as a greeting, means peace. So I would say that like other empires, like other conquering nations, horrible atrocities have been committed by Muslims. There are verses in the Quran that are horribly violent as well. The same exists in the New Testament. The Amalekites were killed entirely, that's genocide. Mentions of that also exist, by the way, in Islamic texts as well. So I wouldn't essentialize that Islam is peaceful, Islam is not peaceful, Islam is an idea, and it needs enlightenment where every part of it can be questioned, and we need Muslims to understand that parts of it are across the board wrong. Believing in genies is wrong.
I agree, thank you.
Thank you.
So if there's any group that the American religious right hates more than atheists, it's Muslims.
Yes.
So are you at all concerned that by pushing back against Muslims, the non-belief community is making strange bedfellows with the American religious right?
No, not at all. Change Islam with science by pushing for science. If somebody is using science in a negative way, are we supposed to stop pushing for science? The truth is the truth. The reality is what it is. Secularism works. That's why we want to push it. It's not because it's our idea and we want our ideas everywhere. It's an idea that has worked, that has reduced violence across most countries that have adopted it. Same for scientific advancement. By looking at the world in a rational way, we become better. Simply because a certain percentage of the community in a few Western countries are bigoted, we shouldn't deny those advances to the rest of the world. To me, that is bigoted. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mohammed.